Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
But you also had people that were very fine people. Very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens would mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens. So are you surprised the Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Welcome to Na Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
I'm Andy Fleming.
And this week we are joined by Katherine Stewart, who is the author of Money, Lies and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. Thanks for coming on the show again, Katherine.
It's great to speak with you guys again.
I guess just to begin with, this is a book about Christian nationalism, but one of the things that you look at in the book is how Christian nationalism is not necessarily that Christian anymore. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
The term Christian nationalism is descriptive of an ideology. The idea that America, for instance, was founded as a so-called Christian nation, our laws should be based on a very reactionary interpretation of the Bible. It's also the description of a political movement engaged in an organized quest for power. But here's the thing, it's not describing people who happen to be Christian and have patriotic sentiments, as many members of the radical right would like us to believe. So it's not a religion. It's not just a set of beliefs. It involves also a rejection of a series of liberal democratic norms, including equality, democratic elections, pluralism, the separation of church and state, which is one of our founding principles in America. It's hard to explain the degree to which the politics leads the religion here. It involves a kind of embrace of authoritarian politics in which a dominant religion or culture uses the power of government. So it's like an exploitation of religion to use this power of government to impose its allegedly moral vision of society at the expense of individual rights. And again, at the expense of our democratic institutions. So it involves a sort of identitarian politics, the idea that there's a we that properly represents the country and a they that don't properly belong. And this idea of the we as really the only legitimate members of the political order, or a group that perceives itself to be the true heirs of the national cause.
Katherine, who is said to constitute this Christian nation? Who qualifies for membership?
I think it's really important to recognize that this movement overall is leadership-driven and organization-driven. It's not driven by the rank and file. So they will, like the leadership will court the base by promoting the idea that America is a conservative Christian nation. Our laws should be based on this very reactionary interpretation of the Bible. And it's an utter rejection of progressive Christianity. I do a lot of my research by going to right-wing and Christian nationalist strategy gatherings and conferences and the like. And recently I was at America Fest. It's an annual conference put on by Turning Point USA, one of the key organizations of the religious right. It was held in Phoenix, Arizona. It drew 20,000 people. And Turning Point Faith is their faith outreach arm. The head of Turning Point Faith, a guy named Lucas Miles, called progressive Christianity heretical. And he actually singled out for attack the social gospel, which is what many Christians think of as the gospel. And he said this sort of progressivism started to infect Christianity back in the 17th century. So he sort of wants to take Christianity back to a time before the 17th century, which is pretty extraordinary if you think about it. So I think many, if not most American Christians think of the religion as having something to do with caring for others and the least of these, but it's a rejection of this idea that of empathy, the idea that we should be able to work across the political aisle in spite of our political differences, which is really how functioning democracies work best. And I want to talk for a minute about that organizational infrastructure, because the reason the movement is as powerful as it is because for the past 5 decades, it has courted funders who have invested huge amounts of money in that infrastructure. So it includes organizations we can divide into categories. There are policy groups, think tanks, a vast legal advocacy ecosystem that is reinterpreting the law in a direction that they want. There are networking organizations that get members of this leadership on the same page. There are pastoral networks. And there is a vast, I would say, messaging or even disinformation sphere that reaches into the rank and file, tells them how to vote. And it is that deep organizational infrastructure that I focused on in Money, Lies, and God, but also in my previous book, The Power Worshippers. That is one feature of the anti-democratic reaction. But in Money, Lies, and God, I talk about the other features of the anti-democratic reaction as well.
It's funny that they identify the 17th century as where the progressives snuck in. I think some would say that 2,000 years ago is when the rot began.
With Jesus himself. It's really amazing. Well, I think we can't take what they say too literally. I think what they're often trying to do is really justify their political agenda. And it's an agenda that absolutely rejects equality. You know, the fear of gender equality is kind of a rocket fuel for this movement. Many leaders, I'm thinking specifically right now, just offhand, of the political pastor, Doug Wilson, who Pete Hegseth has praised, but so many others are starting to speak openly about actually depriving women of the right to vote and saying that giving women the vote was a mistake. Now, of course, the vote wasn't given to women. We had to fight for it. But when you really dig into the beliefs of some of the leaders of this organization, they're not all on the same page on the vote issue. Let me be clear about that. But when you dig into their beliefs, a lot of them really sort of seem to despise women. And they insist on what they call male headship, not only in church, but at home. Some of the key leaders, people like Doug MacArthur, who is a sort of religious leader of the movement now, one of the very political pastors, think that women going out to work is terrible because he said women have to be under the authority of a man.
Katherine, how is this ideology situated in terms of the US Constitution and the notion of the separation of church and state?
Well, it is absolutely not what the idea that many of our founders, all of our founders, to be honest, such as people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison or Adams, or if you think about people like Frederick Douglass or Lincoln, President Lincoln, who played a really vital role in almost like our second American Revolution. It's not what they thought. They thought of the idea America, a country of the people, by the people, and for the people, not a country serving any particular religious purpose or trying to serve a king or a pope or any other kind of religious leader. So this idea is frankly as un-American as it gets.
You've made reference to the fact that a lot of money is being poured into the various think tanks, junk tanks, propaganda networks that are promoting anti-democratic and illiberal notions in the United States. At the same time, you identify massive inequality as being one of the chief factors that helps to explain, in some ways, the appeal of anti-democratic notions and this reactionary movement. Can you talk a little bit more about why is it that so much people with a lot of money are pouring so much of it into this, promoting this ideology and this movement? And how does that, I guess, inequality, the fact of social inequality, make these kinds of movements appealing to people beyond the ranks of the very rich?
Yeah, in Money, Lies, and God, I pay very close attention to the money people, a group of people I call the funders. These are the beneficiaries listen, America has a lot of very rich people. It's only a sector of the very rich people who are participating in this, but they're beneficiaries of the massive concentrations of wealth over the past 5 decades. And they're investing a portion of their fortunes in anti-democratic projects. I'm thinking of people like the Corkerys, Barry Side, the Wilkes brothers, Tim Dunn, members of the DeVos Prince family juggernaut. There are so many I profile in Money, Lies, and God. And then there's a sort of second tier of key funders. So here's the thing. They're not any one type. Some are evangelical, some are Catholic, some are Jewish, others are atheistic. Religiously, frankly, they're all over the place. But they all agree on a sort of need to crush liberalism, really, and what they call the administrative state. Now, a lot of people are going to be hurt if they succeed in destroying a public administration subject to ethics rules and replace it with a sort of privately controlled corporate managed state. But they really don't care about that. I mean, according to the free market fundamentalists who are funding this movement, they say business is always amazing, infinitely better than government. But I think at the same time, many Americans know very well that many of these corporate leaders are simply out there to reward themselves, to get richer, even richer, while the people at the top are going to get massive payouts, but they're going to sort of fleece everybody else. So these vast concentrations of wealth over the past few decades have really destabilized the political system in a lot of different ways. And it's not sort of easy to explain. It sort of works on multiple factors. It's not that the poor are rising up against the rich so much. It's that the rich are actually, this sector of the rich, they're sort of living in information bubbles, right? They're living almost like on islands, but they can hear over the walls or across the waters where the others live, the poor and middle class live, that there's sort of cries, that criticisms that these folks are actually sort of benefiting from their monopolistic practices and unearned wealth. And they're, I think, in many ways, very frightened of that. So I think there's a level in which they're not rational. They're frightened of the middle classes and the poor or sort of working classes coming after them with proverbial pitchforks. So they kind of want to lock in their privileges. And that's where their sort of commitment to an anti-democratic project arises. They're also, I think, escalating wealth inequality makes everybody at all ends of the economic spectrum, whether you're on the top end or the bottom end, it makes everybody more insecure because the people in the bottom, say 90% of the country, find their lives harder than they should be. And they don't always understand who to blame. So they have these often legitimate grievances that can be easily weaponized by movement leaders and hurled at their political enemies. And at the top, they know that there's a lot further to fall. And again, that fear, like that they will have their own privileges revoked. So a lot of these people at the top, they want low taxes for the rich. They want minimal regulation of business. They want, again, if they're involved in polluting industries, fossil fuel or whatever, or they want to be able to be allowed to pollute and exploit the environment without any regulations, protective regulations for the environment. But at the same time that they claim to want just capitalism, it's a great system, they also want, in many instances, tax privileges. They want privileged contracts that are going to benefit them. They want tax subsidies. So this is sort of where a lot of the money piece fits in. And here's the other thing that's really important. A lot of the people who are part of that cadre of super wealthy funders are funding disinformation operations. This is where the lies fits in to the title of my book, Money, Lies, and God. They are massive disinformation or propaganda campaigns existing that are intended to inculcate fear in the American people, to think that they're being victimized by the deep state or so-called woke elite, or that any political opposition to Trump is literally demonic or satanic. I feature one of these engines of conspiracism in my chapter on Reawaken America. It's a pro-MAGA conspiracy fest that takes place in mega churches around the country. And that leads, of course, to the religious nationalism piece of this. Christian nationalism is arguably the most important piece of the anti-democratic reaction. It's a way to get the rank and file on board. It's an ideology and a political machine.
Katherine, one group which has done rather well that you look at in the book are the right-wing Catholics. How have they overcome sectarianism to emerge in such a position? There was a time in American public life when it would be unthinkable that the Catholics would hold so much power.
Yes. I mean, I think that a lot of people talk about this movement as involving evangelicals or white evangelicals, but I think it's really important to note that the movement would be absolutely nowhere without a cadre of ultra-conservative Catholic leaders. And that side of the story is woefully neglected. Conservative Catholics play a critical role, especially in the leadership categories. So there's really a schism within the Catholic Church right now. The rank and file, of course, are a jump ball of American politics. They're sort of all over the political spectrum in nearly equal numbers. But here's something I think it's important to consider. A part of the hierarchy attached to the Pope, although very far from progressive, leans to the left on certain issues, particularly economic and environmental issues, right? Pope Francis is always speaking about the environment and the poor. Meanwhile, the hard right is pushing very much in the opposite direction, and it includes direct appeals to a sort of right-wing populism and demagoguery, but also a very strong alliance with economic conservatives and so-called pro-capitalist people. But within the hard right, there's a further division, and there's like an old hierarchy. It's very anti-Francis, extremely socially conservative, but it's been weakened considerably thanks to the church's, the hierarchy's collusion with child abuse scandals and sex abuse scandals. These scandals have diminished the traditional hierarchy's legitimacy in the eyes of many rank and file Catholics. And in order to fill this vacuum, the super wealthy Catholic conservative laity is now stepping in and taking control over not just the funding of church-related activities, but also the messaging as well. A big part of their platform actually comes from Christian and Catholic media, such as Eternal Word Television Network. It's like EWTN, much of which is in control of these increasingly wealthy and hard-right oligarchs. And what's in it for them, of course, is very straightforward. They want to have their wealth validated and increased. And they also want to, they're extremely afraid of the population that might have, I would say, adopt what they think of as licentious or socially destabilizing ways of living. So that's really important. They've also established outside organizations that are not officially connected to the Catholic hierarchy, but that come in other ways and kind of influence them from outside.
Katherine, the Catholic Church or the Catholic population of the United States in the 20th century is generally understood to be more closely aligned to the Democrats as opposed to Republicans. How have the Democrats responded to the Republicans essentially being Trumpified? And do you think that, as it's currently constituted, the Democrats could be a source of, furthering democracy in the United States?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you're speaking about Catholics specifically, they are, again, the jump ball of American politics. I believe they were pretty much divided in the last election, almost equally. But yes, I mean, Democrats are, of course, pushing back against this. And this is not to say that there aren't challenges within the Democratic Party as well, but they have not been aligned with this agenda whatsoever. I mean, this is a movement that has really destroyed, in a way, the old Republican Party. For many years, the Republican Party believed that they could make use of this movement, this sort of anti-democratic and religious nationalist movement, because they thought, well, they deliver a very reliable slice of votes, but we can control them and it's really good to have them on our side. But they really weren't near, I would say, the center of Republican Party leadership. And now what's happening is that the Republican Party, the sort of guardrails have fallen away and sort of radicals have taken over. These anti-democratic radicals, I mean, what they're doing, like a true conservative movement would want to preserve democratic institutions of our democracy that have served us over time. They would want to preserve, post-war alliances that have led to peace and prosperity in America and Europe and beyond. And instead, this movement has been telling us for years that they're going to smash the institutions that safeguard our democracy. They're going to destroy the institutions of value, such as public education, the legitimacy of the courts, et cetera. And that's exactly what they're doing right now. And to be clear, we're not just talking about Donald Trump and Musk. I mean, really, it's over the past half century that this anti-democracy movement has coalesced in the United States.
It's been a long march, but you also have a look at how the pandemic, I guess, sped the march up a little bit. Could you talk a little bit about the reaction to pandemic response and the radicalizing effect that had on the religious right in the United States?
Yes, the pandemic was a radicalizing event for much of the movement. Many movement leaders really chose the pandemic as a moment to politicize and weaponize people's resentments. Look, the pandemic was difficult for everybody. People had to stay home and worry about communicating with their neighbors. People who were vulnerable were very concerned about getting sick. A lot of people lost family members. I can't count the number of people I know who lost their parents. Several people I know who are young parents. They lost their lives. Unfortunately, it's a very, very sad and scary time. And I would never have thought that they would use this as an opportunity to weaponize that kind of anger and confusion and resentment. But that's precisely what they did. I remember when news of the pandemic first broke out, many religious right leaders said, "Oh, news of the pandemic is an attempt to get Trump." I published a piece in the New York Times op-ed at that time, and I was sort of just quoting some of these religious right leaders who were saying there is no pandemic. This is an attempt to get Trump. And then once it was very clear that was not an attempt to quote unquote get Trump, it was actually a real thing that was killing a lot of people and overwhelming hospital emergency rooms, they didn't stop. I mean, they still reached into the rank and file and said the satanic, demonic Democrats, whoever, are trying to get you and deprive you of your freedoms, rather than saying we're just trying to figure out how to handle a public health crisis without resulting in too many unnecessary deaths and overwhelming our hospitals. So it's very sad. The Reawaken America tour, which occupies Chapter 9, that initiative got its start during the pandemic. And I've been to a number of Reawaken America tour stops. Even this past year, I went to one, and they're still talking about the pandemic. They're still talking about Fauci and the World Health Organization and promoting all of these lies. There's a fellow there who was actually saying that Fauci should be hanged or drowned with a millstone around his neck. I mean, it's really kind of horrible talk, death threats against someone who is, merely just trying to serve in the interests of public health. And I think it's kind of, it sort of speaks to how much that fear is a huge motivator for people within this movement, for the rank and file. I mean, that conspiracy coexisted at Reawaken America along with a host of other conspiracies. The Great Replacement. Democrats they would say, literally trying to kill you off, microchip you and replace you with others, people of color, whoever, people from other countries. The conspiracy of the stolen election, of course, everybody there believes that the 2020 election was stolen, which it wasn't. So funny how there's no election fraud when Trump wins, but all election fraud when the win is someone they don't like. And then, of course, they are coming after you in your home, and they're going to take control of all of your money, and our state schools, our public schools exist to change children's gender against their will, and all these insane conspiracies. But you go into that space and you see that it's really all about the mobilization of fear. If you can get people full of fear and separate them from the facts, it makes them so much easier to control. And that's why it's really, propaganda is a really great tool for authoritarian leaders all over the world and has been throughout history.
Reawaken America is just one of a number of conferences and events that you attended for the research for this book. What is it like going to these events?
I've always thought that you really can't know what's happening in our politics by sitting in a room full of journalists in New York City. You really have to be on the ground where it happens and see what they're saying. They've been telling us for years what they're going to do. They tell us what they're going to do, and then they do it, and then they tell us that they did it. It's not that they're hiding. It's that a lot of people haven't been listening.
I guess, Katherine, just to end with, you do have some proposals that you think might help to address this anti-democratic movement, perhaps prevent it from completely destroying America's democratic institutions. But in the short term, it seems that a number of them depend upon the use of the courts and the judiciary and the law and things of this nature. However, it seems that from the Supreme Court, in a sense, on down, the courts have become quite partial to this anti-democratic agenda. So I'm wondering, do you think that there are actually legislative, judicial measures that can be used to kind of fight back and to retain some of these democratic aspects of US society?
Look, there's a lot that can be done. Now is not the time to curl up in despair. We have institutions to protect, pro-democracy organizations to support. We have elections in less than 2 years. We have lawsuits to pursue. We have corruption to expose. I think one of the courts, the Supreme Court certainly won't save us because it's been thoroughly captured and politicized. But it takes a long time for cases to wind their way through the courts up to the Supreme Court. So I think the job right now is to kind of slow roll this, to sort of block to the extent that we can, and to, that dreaded word messaging. We need to message to the American public the threats that we face as people lose their jobs, as they have to pay more as a consequence of needless tariffs, as they lose out on benefits they earned, or as the government becomes completely dysfunctional, as consumer protections evaporate, as the Trump administration prioritizes buffoonish stunts over policies that actually benefit people. It's really up to us to say over and over again, this is what they're doing to you. They did this. And so there's just so much to be done so that we can, number one, turn out our base in the midterm elections and also go after low propensity voters. And in terms of damage will be done to our democracy, and will take some time to restore it. But at the same time, freedom is not a given in our world. If you think about it, autocracy has been the way humans have ruled all over the world. Not always, but it seems to be like, if you look through history, that tends to be more of the norm. The freedoms of democracy are fragile and they're beautiful and worth fighting for. So I think this is not the time to curl up in bed and suck your thumb. When I was at America Fest, I heard Steve Bannon speak, and he got up there with he's this fake populist guy, but he's really on the side of billionaires, but he knows how to message to the little people, right? So he stands up there with his flak jacket and he said, when you lost in 2020, you didn't crawl into bed. You didn't suck your thumbs. You didn't give up. You went out there and you fought, and now look at the win. And he's absolutely right about that. He said that it's that fighting spirit that turned it around. They lost in 2020, but they didn't give up. Now, of course, they spread lies and disinformation. Those of us who believe in democracy wouldn't wish to emulate their most craven tactics, but we would do well to note their determination and to have that a similar determination. And it's not going to be easy, but if there's will to do it, it can be done.
Well, Katherine, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for coming on. If people want to find your work online, you have a website at katherinestewart.me, and the book is Money, Lies and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Well, Andy, that is our show. We'll be back next week. Just a reminder, it is subscriber month here at 3CR. So if you're interested in becoming a subscriber to the station, do head to 3cr.org.au/subscribe or call during business hours 9419 8377. See you next week.
See you then.
Public transport's great.
What's not great is that unless you've got a radio with you, you can't listen to 3CR when you're on it.
Until now. The Community Radio Plus app lets you listen to us wherever you are.
Get on board and search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
Time's on my mind when I had you by my side. Am I thinking loud? Do I want you around?
Are you a 3CR subscriber?
We really need our listeners to subscribe to the station.
Call 03 9419 8377 or sign up online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.